who during his time wants to see Jerusalem built up, because the Muslims now have much money from jihad. So he wants to see Jerusalem beautified and built up to its greatest. So he builds Masjid al-Aqsa again, rebuilds it, and he builds the Dome of the Rock. And he puts in charge of it two of the scholars of his time, Rija bin Haywa and Abdullah bin Salam, or Abd bin Salam. And when they finish building it up, they write a letter to the Khalifa Abd al-Malik in Damascus. They said to him, we have built it in such a way that nobody can say anything, that there's anything else to build. And 100,000 dinars are left, so you as the Emir al-Mu'min, spend it wherever you think is best for the Muslims. Abd al-Malik says to them, sends a letter back saying, I am giving you these 100,000 dinars for the good job that you two have done. The two scholars write back, they said, it is more befitting for us that we take our women's jewelry, their gold, and we use it to beautify this masjid, and our money than to take this money. In other words, we should not take any of this money, but we should rather take our own personal wealth and add it to this masjid. So this shows us how the scholars and the leaders of the Muslims used to pay attention to Bayt al-Maqdis. And in fact, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, when he became the Khalifa and he returned government back to the way of the prophethood, Minhaj al-Nabuwah, and he was a Khalifa only for 2 years, and he reformed the Ummah in only 2 years. He told all his governors to go to Masjid al-Aqsa, pray 2 rak'ahs, and to give an oath that they would obey him and be just amongst the Muslims. Now the Muslims then, of course, left the Sunnah, they left the message of the Quran, they declined, the Shia took over, and then the Crusaders come. And they take Masjid al-Aqsa from the believers in the 5th century. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises for this ummah the likes of Nur ad-Din al-Zangi. This leader, Muslim leader in Mosul, in northern Iraq, who puts it upon himself to return back the lands of the Muslims from the Christians, from the Crusaders. And Nur ad-Din al-Zangi conquers over 70 of the Crusader forts, castles, and many cities. But his wish is to see Jerusalem conquered. So he builds a minbar. And the Muslims are surprised. You're building a minbar for Bayt al-Maqdis, and yet we still haven't even come close to that? He said, yes, I've built this minbar so that it may one day will stand upon it in Masjid al-Aqsa when it's returned to the Muslims. And then of course Nur ad-Din al-Zangi, Allah decrees that he dies. He's killed by a Batini, one of the Shia. He's poisoned, and that's why he's called Nur ad-Din al-Shaheed, the martyr. But his student, and the one who was raised in his household, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, continues the return of the Holy Lands from the Crusades. And when Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi is described by his judge Ibn Shiddad in his history, and likewise quoted by the other historians like Ibn Kathir and others, when he enters into Bayt al-Maqdis, when they take it from the Christians, he sends the command to Damascus, bring us the minbar of Nur ad-Din. And they bring that minbar back, and the Khatib stands upon it, and they give the khutbah. Al-Jum'ah, the first Jum'ah back in Masjid al-Aqsa after 70 years in the possession of the Christians, so much so that even the Christians put a major cross on top of Masjid al-Aqsa, on top of the Dome of the Rock. This minbar, as a side point to know, was remained in Masjid al-Aqsa, and the Khatibs gave khutbah after khutbah until 1967, when that Australian Christian fanatic went there and firebombed that Masjid al-Aqsa and burnt down the minbar. And that's why now all we can see of the minbar is just if we see a picture of it. Now, of course, the Muslims, after taking Masjid al-Aqsa, they remained there until modern history, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed, we can't have 10 more minutes, Shaykh. So they want me to end the lecture in 10 minutes. So if I have to end, then if you get angry, I won't tell to blame. So then Masjid al-Aqsa returns, is taken from the Muslims. And the first event towards that is in 1798. When Napoleon takes Egypt, and one of his aims is that he wants to take Jerusalem, to send all the Jews from Europe into Jerusalem. Napoleon fails, but then in 1882 the British take Egypt, and then finally in World War I, with the fall of the Uthmanis, the Khilafah, General Allenby, the British general, enters into Jerusalem and ascends upon the Mount of Olives and says, now the Crusades have ended. And then the Christians, the British, control not only Jerusalem, but they also control the surrounding lands, being Egypt and Iraq. And then they leave it, and they give it to the Jews, and the state of Israel comes, and the history, we know the rest. In 48, the state of Israel. In 67, they take Jerusalem, and the Intifada, which we now see, and we don't have time to get into those details. But what do we want to talk about now? We want to now move to another topic, even very quickly, about the quality of those people who are now in Jerusalem, the qualities of the Jews. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran over and over their qualities. And I have many passages which I would like to quote, but unfortunately we don't have time. So what I will do is I'll quote Sayyid Qutb, who has a very lovely essay which he wrote, rahmatullah alayh, called Ma'arakatuna Ma'al Yahud, or Our Struggle with the Jews. So I'll just read a paragraph or two from it. He says, Sayyid Qutb begins his essay by saying, the Muslim Ummah continues to suffer from the same Jewish machinations and double dealing which discomfited the early Muslims. But the Muslim Ummah today does not, one must say with great regret, utilize those Quranic directives and this divine guidance regarding these problems. And then he mentions some certain passages. He says the Muslim Ummah does not take advantage of the Islamic sources which its Salaf used. Only in this way were the Salaf, meaning the Sahaba, able to overcome Jewish conspiracy and double dealing in Medina. And thus did the religion of Islam arise, and thus was the Muslim Ummah born. The Jews continue through their wickedness and double dealing to lead this Muslim Ummah away from its religion and to alienate it from its Quran. They do this in order to prevent the Ummah from utilizing its traditional Quranic weapons and its perfect Qurani readiness for this struggle. The Jews are secure so long as this Muslim Ummah is estranged from the sources of its real power and the roots of its pure knowledge. In other words, so long as we stay away from the Quran, they will continue to have the upper hand over us. Now, the lecture must come to an end. So let us quickly talk about the future. What does the future hold for the Ummah?